Hello, thanks for tuning in to Channel 22 for this presentation, or perhaps you've clicked on a YouTube link and you're watching this online. This is a presentation that we are presenting around the community and to you watching this about the fiscal challenges facing the city of East Lansing. I'm Ted Staton. I'm the city manager here in East Lansing, and we're happy to have your interest in such an important topic. For many years, many East Lansing residents have read news clips or seen electronic news reports about the economy in Michigan and the impact that it's had on the state budget. Well, it's had an impact on the city of East Lansing as well. The decade-long recession that we've experienced here in Michigan has resulted in dramatic reductions in state employment, state expenditures, and one of those categories of expenditures is revenue sharing funds the state shares with local governments to provide basic services. I'd like to share a few charts with you that illustrate those declines in state spending. And the first one is a decline in total state revenue from a high of nearly $10 billion in fiscal year 2000 to where it is in fiscal year 10 of actually $8 billion. And adjusted for inflation, it's been even a more dramatic decline, a high of $9.2 billion in 2000 and a low of $6 billion. So more than a $3 billion decline in revenues the state has for its many important functions, including sharing some of that revenue with local governments for the provision of police, fire, library, senior programs, etc. We have a second chart here that shows the size of state government in terms of employment. This chart shows a dramatic decline in the number of state employees from about 1980 to the present. The decline has been really across the board, but when you subtract out what have been increases in corrections employees, the state has about 30,000 fewer employees today than it had in 1980, from about 65,000 down to about 35,000. We take a look at certain categories of expenditures and how they have fared during this prolonged period of state budget cuts. We look at four categories in particular: corrections, school aid, higher education, and state revenue sharing. The zero line here would be no change. Above the zero line would be increases, below the zero line would be decreases. And you can see in relative terms, state revenue sharing has experienced the largest reduction of these four categories of expenditures. Here's what it's meant to the city of East Lansing. In real terms, the city went from receiving about $7 million a year in fiscal year 2001 to the point where we believe we'll be in fiscal year 2011 of receiving just a little over $3 million. So a decline of not quite $4 million a year. Over the life of these cuts, the city has seen about $11 million of reductions in revenue sharing from the state. That really means our ability to rely on state revenues and state sources to help us provide basic city services has declined, and we can show that in the form of some simple pie charts. This one comes from our 2001 general fund budget. The blue is the percentage of our revenues that we get from property taxes, and the purple is the percent that we get from the state of Michigan. And if you just keep that in mind for a moment, fast forward 10 years, 9 years, and you can see that the percent of revenues coming from our local sources, state or local property taxes, has become almost half the budget, and the slice of the pie coming from the state has shrunk by about 10%. So we're becoming more and more reliant on our own resources. The state's provided less and less resources in the form of state revenue sharing. Well, people ask, so what is revenue sharing? Well, revenue sharing isn't charity from the state of Michigan to local governments. Revenue sharing is a result of a long-standing agreement between the state and local governments that allows the state to collect taxes, so there can be a uniform state sales tax rate, for example, for the state to collect state income tax, and for some of that revenue to be shared back with local governments. And over the course of the last 10 years, the state has continued to cut the amount of revenue it shares with local governments. We think fundamentally breaching the longstanding agreement between the state and local governments in this regard. Well, we've been fortunate that our own efforts to build and grow the economy in East Lansing has been successful, and we've seen a steady amount of growth in new construction and property value increases, and that's helped us raise additional revenues from our own property tax that has helped to offset the cuts in state revenue sharing. This chart shows those increases over the decade, but as you can see during this last period, there's an actual decline, and that's been a result of lower inflation and a result in the declines in the housing market that really have been experienced nationally, more profoundly in Michigan, one of the top states in the nation in terms of foreclosures, and we haven't been immune from those cuts in East Lansing. This chart simply shows what's happened to taxable values, both in terms of total values, real property, which is buildings, and then personal property, which is a tax that's on industrial and commercial equipment. Well, inflation can affect property taxes and property values as well. Proposal A allows inflationary adjustments in property taxes. And this chart shows the variety of inflationary changes that have occurred. The most important thing about this chart is the fact that for the first time, really in the history of Proposal A, we actually see an adjusted decline in values. And so that's really affected the property value of every house and property in East Lansing. The other factor that can influence property tax values is sometimes considered the pop-up. What happens when a house sells that has had a Proposal A cap? During stronger real estate times, when the house would sell at significantly more than the taxable value, the property would be reassessed and the city would see some gain associated with that. The other factor has been new construction, and this chart illustrates what has happened to the value of new construction. And not surprisingly, with the commercial credit tightening that the nation and Michigan has experienced in the last couple of years, we've seen dramatic decreases in the value of new construction. That, of course, reduces what new property values get placed on the tax rolls. And so those three factors together dictate what property values will be, and as a result, what property tax receipts will be for the city. Healthcare costs have also affected households and business and governmental budgets, throughout the country. It's why there's been such a strong push to reform healthcare at every level. We have been working collaboratively with employees to slow the growth of healthcare costs, and this chart shows this, I think, in a rather graphic way, with the purple line showing the national trend in healthcare costs, double-digit trends every year, and the blue line shows how the city of East Lansing has been able to control these healthcare costs. It's affected the cost to provide retiree healthcare as well, and in recent years, we've had to recognize the liabilities that we have for retirees, and this chart shows $40 million of liability with only about $3.4 million of that liability actually funded. And pension costs have also risen, largely because of declines in the stock market. Our own pension investments have declined, causing us to increase the amount we need to contribute to fund those pensions. So we have about a $5 million challenge to deal with, and we'll talk more about that in the next segment.